Welcome to the EVready podcast, featuring industry leaders and their perspectives on electrification, hosted by EVready Energy. Hey everybody, this is Chris Nihan. Welcome to the EVready podcast. With me today, I have General Manager of Retail Market Development, Ken Parkman of Toyota Motors North America. That was a little bit of a mouthful. But Ken, thanks so much for taking the time.
No, happy to be here.
So I've been, obviously we have a relationship working previously, and in this space, I think it's so hard to find companies who really value partners. I think sometimes it's said out loud, but it's not necessarily acted on. And just been grateful for our relationship so far. And I'd love, if maybe you could kick off the podcast talking about Toyota's approach to having partners.
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to. I mean, I think a lot of it starts with just the culture of Toyota here in North America. I mean, we have a really long-standing relationship and partnership with our dealer network, and I think that's really where it starts. I mean, our top management many years ago really valued the importance of the dealers and the importance of working closely with the dealers to support them, because ultimately they're the ones that take care of the experience for the customers. So over the 60 plus years Toyota has been here in North America, that culture exists today. And everything that we do as a company that impacts the dealers, we get the dealers involved in what we're working on or we're developing, because we want to make sure that it's something that's going to help them. And again, that partnership that we have, I would say, in knowing a lot of dealers that have other brands, the relationship with Toyota and Lexus is a great one. It's special and it's very different from some of the other OEMs. And that's that culture that we have of the relationship with our dealers, I think extends, as you were asking, to the dealer partners that we have when we that we work with. In my case, in retail market development, we're responsible for dealer facilities and supporting our regions and supporting our dealers. And that's one of the things that when we were trying to figure out how to get our dealers ready to start selling the BZ4X and RZ on the Lexus side, we first started by looking at what the other OEMs were doing out there in the space of BEV readiness. And as people that work for Toyota, we are definitely not experts in the EV space, and we quickly knew that. And the one common thing that we found in all the other OEMs is they had partnered with a company that does specialize in battery electric, not just in automotive space and other spaces. And that's really where we started to work closely with Lane Valente and then also ChargePoint, to be able to try to put together a program that we could offer our dealers to make it as seamless as possible. But the last thing I'll also add on this partnership is one of the things that early on that we communicated to both LVI and ChargePoint was that we're all working together, and we all need to kind of be one when we're communicating and supporting our dealers, because any third party company that we partner with to support our dealers, and we go and we visit the dealers, a lot the dealers really look at obviously Toyota, but also the business partners as a part of Toyota. And we want the experience that the dealers have to be as good as it could be. So it's I know it's a long-winded answer, but I think we just have a culture that we built on many years of the importance of partnership, and it's great that it
It,
continues today.
it's just interesting because I think in the automotive space, people know that, like, Toyota's reputation is that they are great to work with. Toyota and Lexus are two great companies to work with. Very, very unique in how they go about doing business. but I don't think like the general population knows that. They more understand like some of the values that Toyota has tied to the cars that you're selling and the reliability of the cars. But the approach to business, I think, is just like so unique and not fully understood outside of the automotive space. At least I personally didn't know
Yeah.
until until Toyota and I developed a good relationship. So tell me this, and this isn't just an EV question.
Mhm.
And my apologies, I'm going to open this door in a second. But keep going once I do. Um, your role of manager of retail market development, what are
Mhm.
like the biggest challenges that you face on a daily basis?
Yeah. Well, it's a great question because obviously we all know in the automotive space how BEV is the number one thing that everyone wants to talk about. And I think over the last couple years, there's been a lot of questions internally by dealers in terms of dealership of the future. I mean, what should the dealers be doing? We have our current facility program, which we call Image USA 2, and it's been around for 20 years. And we feel strongly that the look and feel of our Toyota dealerships has many more years to come with the white portal and the gray ACM. So that's the exterior of the facility, but we're internally trying to work and figure out what should that facility of the future be now that you've got dealers starting to sell BEVs in terms of should there be more space internally in the dealership for people to come and hang out and charge and have a lounge or those are all things that we're still trying to figure out. Our hope is that over the next probably 6 to 9 months, that we'll have a better idea of some more solid recommendations for our dealers as volume will increase for us over the probably the next 2 3 years. But the other challenge that I've learned over the last couple of years in trying to work with dealers to get them just with the minimum number of chargers to take care of the launch of BZ is just how complex and there's so many factors outside of the dealer's control in terms of permitting and city codes and the current electric grid in a specific dealer's town or whatever. There's so many factors that are out there, and again trying to figure out what that future recommended guideline to our dealers is something that we know is going to be impactful. We know our dealers, we got to have them be ready, but what's realistic to ask of them? And I think that's something that if you ask me what keeps me up at night, that I would say it's that not really knowing exactly what we should offer offer our dealers because we want a good customer experience, but we also don't want to ask too much of our dealers.
Yeah, so that's a great transition to the next question. You've seen different auto manufacturer strategies tied to aggression around how many plugs to install at dealerships. And there are some OEMs that have acquired, $1 million in investment, and that's had a certain response from the dealer body. Toyota took a much more conservative approach. Uh, Tell us a little bit about how you came to that approach and what do you think the response has been from the dealers?
Yeah, no. So yeah, our approach was definitely unique, and it was a little bit different for Toyota and Lexus. So I'll start first with Toyota. Um, from a government regulations, we needed to ensure that we were selling the BZ4X in the ZEV states that are out there, mainly California, the Northwest and the East Coast. So we took the approach that we were going to, from a company standpoint, take 65 or excuse me, 85% of the volume initially was going to go to the ZEV states and then 15% to the non-ZEV states. Well, for us, we have 1,237 Toyota dealers, and if you look at the ZEV states, there's only 375 dealers that are in the ZEV states, and the over 850 or so are non-ZEV. So knowing that that was going to be the allocation and volume that those dealers could expect over the first couple years, and our volume for last year, we sold 8,800 BZ4Xs. And our volume for this year and even in 25 is still relatively low. It's in the low teens. So knowing that and looking again, as you mentioned, at what some of the other OEMs had required dealers, of adding a lot of level 3 chargers and a pretty significant investment, we worked with our dealers, got feedback, and said, hey, what as a minimum, what would we recommend? And really, it was simple. We wanted to have one charger, Toyota branded, in the front of the dealership to create awareness. We wanted the dealer to have one charger in service, and then we wanted to have one charger that the dealers would be selling in delivery for an at-home charger. So those three chargers, and they were level 2 chargers. Again, in the ZEV states, if dealers wanted to opt for level 3, DC fast chargers, they could, but that was not a requirement. So if you look at average dealer investment in our ZEV states for Toyota, it was roughly average dealer spent $36,000. On the Toyotas, or on the non-ZEV side, it was about 21,000. So it was a very minimal investment, but again, knowing the volume being minimal for these first couple years, we didn't want to have the dealers, overinvest, because, again, the technology in level 3 chargers is changing. So I would hate, we didn't want the dealers to invest in technology and equipment today that 3 years from now they needed to upgrade. And Lexus was a little bit different, just because the volume of Lexus was higher, and there's only 244 Lexus outlets. So the throughput and volume for Lexus was higher for Toyota. So that, Lexus had slightly, their average was about 3 level 2 chargers for each of the respective stores. And obviously ZEV states, had a little bit more. So again, that was really our strategy. We wanted to be realistic. We didn't want the dealers to overinvest, but we knew it was also a short term. It was really a strategy that was going to get us the first 3 years. And then now, as I mentioned earlier, that's these next 6 to 9 months is our plan to develop that next phase, to prepare the dealers really for the volume that's going to come in 26.
And just for folks that aren't in the industry, ZEV is a zero emission vehicle state where there's a requirement to sell a certain amount of electric vehicles at a dealership in those states. So Ken, can you talk a little bit about, generally what we see in the marketplace is luxury models electrify first, and then as the cost of the gas vehicle gets a little bit lower, those take a little bit longer to electrify. Talk to us a little bit about the strategy of Lexus electrification efforts versus Toyota.
Yeah, no, I mean, as you mentioned, the cost of EVs is much higher. So I think, mainly the luxury industry is certainly seeing more of a focus, and really we're seeing that, on Lexus when it comes to their future product. And that's why, as I mentioned, for example, RZ launched this year and there were sales of 5,300. The next year's volume is going to be around 14,000, and then it's going to go up to about 40+ thousand. So the Lexus volume over the next couple of years is certainly going to increase. And on a by dealer basis, again, that throughput through a much smaller number of stores is a significant amount of the volume. And the current plan right now, from a company standpoint, is by 2035, so 12 years from now, roughly, that 100% of Lexus volume will be BEVs. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of things that could change. I mean, we're all banking on, BEVs are what people want, but there's also a cost associated with it. So, that's really the focus, from a product standpoint has really started more on the luxury side for Lexus. And then obviously on Toyota, we've got our BZ model. There's plans, we're going to get a minor change, some minor changes to that vehicle in 2025. So it's going to be another year. And then the future product cadence after that on Toyota. So really our focus getting into the world of BEVs, I know many would say that we were a little late to the party, but we're going to focus on the Lexus side to compete on luxury, and then obviously now that we've got a Toyota offering.
So, to your point, there is a reputation sometimes for Toyota of electrification being a little bit more slower than some of the other brands, but you also have a heavier mix of um, hybrids and plug-in hybrids as a part of your strategy, I think, than other car manufacturers are focusing on. And I think part of that story is a little bit misunderstood, in the general public, but part of it's about the idea of like decarbonizing the world and what's the strategy, and is the best thing to decarbonize to have fully battery electric vehicles, or is it to have um, a mix of different types of electric vehicles? Can you talk to us a little bit about how Toyota thinks about that?
Yeah.
And yeah.
No, it's a great point. And again, with all the focus on BEV, we've been selling hybrids for 20 plus years. With the Prius launching in the mid 90s. And we've sold millions of hybrids over the years, and it's been a great vehicle for us. And it's the environmental impacts of hybrids. And now that we also have plug-in hybrids, and we also have hydrogen, we've got the Mirai, which is sold in California, obviously in small volume. So when you look at our product offering, we've got ICE engines, we've got plug-in hybrids, we've got hybrids, we've got BEVs now, and then we also have hydrogen with Mirai. We call our approach a portfolio approach. And we're not putting all of our focus just on BEV or just on hybrids, because we know that there's people out there that want certain things. But when you look at the carbon footprint, and I'll share something with you that you may have heard of or not, but it's something that we're trying to communicate out to a larger audience. Is with so much focus on EVs, and if you look at the raw materials that are needed to build one BEV, we have this 1-6-90 rule that's out there, and really what that's saying is the raw materials that it takes to make just one battery electric vehicle, you could actually build 6 plug-in hybrids. And if you look at those same resources for one battery electric, you could build 90 hybrid vehicles. And if you look at the carbon footprint and the impact of those large number of vehicles that are out there that are much better for the environment, it's very positive. But I know a lot of people are just focused on BEV, and there's some OEMs out there just putting all their chips into battery electrics today. So again, we're taking a more conservative approach. We've come out and said by 2030, roughly 30% of our sales will be just BEV. But again, we're going to continue to focus on hybrids. We've got if over the last couple of years, we've actually started to transition when we've launched new models to fully hybrid. We used to have a nice engine option and a hybrid. I think Sienna was a great example of that. When that new model launched, it just comes into hybrid. And that's really, you'll continue to see that over the next several years when we've come out with some of our new products. They're going to start transitioning. Even some of the higher volume vehicles are going to transition into just hybrid offerings, which from our standpoint, again, we feel is much better for the environment. It's just I think unfortunately most people are just focused on, they just hear BEV, and that's all anyone talks about. They, it's like the only way to help the environment is to have more battery electrics, but we just need to help educate people a little bit more on the fact that hybrids and plugins are very impactful in a positive way.
Yeah, I just thought it was so interesting to hear this is like, I developed a relationship with Toyota because look, I'm a BEV fan. I will never drive anything but a battery electric vehicle. I love the performance of it. I'm addicted to it and all those different things. But there's so many discussions about, the environment as it relates to electric vehicles, and it's turned into a political thing. And I think the way that Toyota speaks about it is very unique in the industry and is worth people listening to. So I'm happy that to hear you kind of explain that. And just out of curiosity, if people wanted to like learn more about Toyota's decarbonization plans, like learn more, like where would you go?
There's information on Toyota.com, and I mean, I'd be happy after this. I mean, I'll be happy to forward you the document that our government affairs document put together to help educate not only our you know team members that work for Toyota and Lexus, but all our dealers as well. Um, so yeah, no, I'd be happy to forward um, some material that we've developed, and it's public information. But I think if you look at from an environmental standpoint, if you can go on twitter.com, and it'll talk about a lot of the things that we're doing. You know, there's a lot of environmental programs. I mean, Toyota has this 2050 environmental global plan. Obviously BEVs are one part of it. In speaking about environmental efforts, one thing I'll just touch upon real quickly is, 2 years ago, we know a lot of our dealers are reinvesting in their facilities, and many, when they originally built, were focused on LEED, environmentally friendly dealership and facility, and there's a lot of LEED environmental facilities, non-automotive, that are out there in cities and towns. But we just created a program called D.E.E.P, which is our dealership environmental excellence program that is starting to gain some traction. We've got about 65 dealers signed up. Our hope is to get to maybe 200 by the end of the year. But that's a program that we've partnered with a company called Altura, that goes out there and sits down with the dealer and looks at all, their, from electric to water to all their utilities, talks about solar, talks about LED light. I mean, there's so many things that a dealer can do to modernize their facility to make it more environmentally friendly. And it's a program that Honda had been doing for quite a few years. They also have used Altura, but it's something that we've started, and it's been really well received from our dealers. And the savings that dealers have been able to recognize over just the first year or 2 years on the program have been really, really positive. So that's, again, from an environmental standpoint, Toyota is very environmentally friendly, very conscious. So we've got our focus on our future product, but we also are looking to figure out how can we help our dealers with their facility and being more environmentally friendly.
Yeah, obviously, so many dealerships out there. There's a big opportunity there. And as like green economics become more economic, I imagine that more dealers will jump on board.
Yeah, and the investment for the dealers, there's a fee associated. Obviously Altura works closely with the dealer, and the on average the dealer investment from the dealer standpoint is about $3,000 a year. But the dealers that have been on the program, the average savings has been anywhere between $15,000 to $20,000 per store. So to spend 3,000 to save 15 to 20 or so, I mean, that's a pretty good deal. And we've had many other dealers that have even saved more. So it's definitely gaining traction. Some of our larger dealer groups and some of the public companies have definitely seen it as a benefit. And yeah, we're excited about it.
So, my final question for you is electric, not electric. What's the most exciting thing about Toyota and Lexus in 2024?
Most exciting thing in 2024? That's a great question.
What are you most looking forward to?
Um, I think the dealer, the dealers have done really, really well over the last few years. I mean, inventory, I mean, both Toyota and Lexus, since, pre-COVID. So let's just say last 3 years, inventories have been in the single digit day supply. And, I think a lot of customers may not have necessarily got the vehicle they wanted. They took what they could. We ended the year now, you know, Lexus is a 20-day supply. Toyota's now at 13, 14 days supply. We're going to see inventory continue to grow, not grow, to pre-COVID levels. I mean, pre-COVID, our dealer stock for 1,237 dealers was around 300,000 units at any given time. I mean, today we're still less than 100. I think we see that getting back to maybe 15, maybe 20-day supply throughout the year. But we also have a lot of, exciting new product that's coming. And I think there's nothing that gets dealers more excited and customers than new product. The all new 2024 Tacoma is just arriving in dealerships now. We have an all new Camry that's going to be coming out this year. On the Lexus side, they launched the TX, which has been just a home run of a vehicle. The new GX is coming out. Again, over the next couple years, our BEV lineup, it's going to be 25 until, we start looking at, changes to our current product. But no, I'd like to see, inventory improve. I think that's going to make it a better customer experience for people out there looking for vehicles. I mean, I got to tell you, I've had so many family and friends over the last couple of years that are, wanting this vehicle or wanting that vehicle, and they're reaching out to dealers and they can't find it. And it's frustrating for a lot of people, especially if they need to or have to change their vehicle. There's been such a limited inventory. So, I mean, it'll create a better customer experience, and dealers are going to continue to provide the customers with what they want. So it should be a great year. Dealer profits continue to go well. I think one other thing that you talked about earlier, kind of wrap it up on this kind of partnership is, we don't we have a history of many, many years where, we haven't added a lot of stores to our dealer network, both Toyota and Lexus. I mean, again, we've got 1,237 Toyota, 244 Lexus, and, that's really the way it's been for the last several years. And, we have the mentality that we want to grow with the dealers that we have. We want them to have the highest sales per outlet. We want them to be the most profitable, because we know if they're profitable, they can reinvest in their facility, they can reinvest in their customers and their own people. So that's that close partnership mentality that we have. Again, we want our dealers to be really successful, and the dealers appreciate that. And again, I think it goes back to trying to, that winning combination is us working closely with them, us providing them the best product that customers want, and them doing their job, which is giving the customer a great experience.
Yeah, well said. Well said. A good year ahead. Ken, thanks for taking the time to join the podcast and telling us a little bit more about Toyota and Lexus. And I know I encourage people to go to Toyota's website and read their sustainability program. It's just, it's unique, it's interesting. And yeah, thanks again for the time and for everybody joining the podcast.